So the small African country of Lesotho, it's actually spelled like it's pronounced Lesotho, but it's pronounced Lesotho, makes most of its money from exports selling garments and diamonds to America. And it's got a trade deficit with America of about $235 million. Not a great deal of money, but enough for Donald Trump the first time around to say that he's going to slam them with tariffs of 50%. Now, this is a country that's now declared a national state of emergency because their textile industry is suffering a great deal with all of this uncertainty. Look, there's the national state of emergency means there are new ways for businesses. It's easier to set up a new business, but that's really not going to solve the problem for them. They've got an unemployment rate which is about, on average, 12 or 13%. They've got a youth unemployment rate, though, that's over 40%.
Wow.
And that is before all of this happened. So it's only going to get worse. Now, of course, it might not be quite as bad as that, because we know, obviously, countries like this, there's going to be a lot of casual work that gets counted perhaps as unemployed, but they're working. But that was before the tariffs were introduced. Donald Trump has dismissed Lesotho as an African nation that nobody's ever heard of. Therefore,
well, nobody's ever pronounced properly before this podcast, but
there we are.
I have heard of it.
Yeah. Not Lesotho, Lesotho. This is one of those countries that Donald Trump says is ripping off Americans. How heartless a bastard can you be, I wonder? Can you be any more than that? I think that's the epitome of it, isn't it?
It is rather. I mean, did they have a trade surplus with America or a trade deficit?
Well, sorry, they're selling. Well, it depends which way you're talking. But
they sell more than they import back from America.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it's that particular formula was. If we have to look back and see any of the real disasters of artificial intelligence hallucinations, it's probably that stupid formula that Trump first used to justify those tariffs, because it's the sort of thing, if you ask an AI, that's the sort of nonsense it's going to generate for you, and it gives a certain ring of authenticity to it. But the whole idea, a country as poor as Lesotho is ripping off America. I mean, it just shows that America has lacked an industrial policy for its entire history. And that's what's actually led to this situation. And this is, I'm getting sick of my fight with MMTers on trade, but it's the same basic argument that, actually it's the opposite of the argument they make, because they say, oh, it's great, Lesotho is sending us free goods, let's cut the tariffs to zero. That's the attitude of the MMT crowd, which is probably, if I had to pick a form of sanity, it's probably more sane than Trump reckoning a country like that is ripping them off. But the whole reason America's importing as much as it is because it's outsourced its manufacturing to the rest of the world, and that's why it's running, and because of the overvalued dollar. So if anybody's ripping America off, it's itself. But I wouldn't want to try to explain that to Donald Trump.
No, but we are all citizens of the world as well. And I personally don't see anything wrong with it. I mean, there's the question, okay, should America be buying stuff on the cheap from Lesotho, where the average wage is, the minimum wage is $110 per month. The average wage, including those people, that are exporting diamonds, is $650 per month. I mean, obviously, there's nowhere in the world that America can work in competition to those. So should America be saying, well, okay, yes, we are going to help you set up industries so that we can buy stuff cheaply from you and keeping wages down? There's a philosophical question about, the ethics behind that, I guess. But if you weren't doing that, what would they do?
Yeah, well, this is one of the ways in which third world countries have always industrialized. And Danny Roddick, who's otherwise a mainstream economist, he's based at Harvard University, has done the best empirical work on this. And despite the usual claims of mainstream economists, and despite the claims of MMT, he's found that the countries that manage to successfully industrialize are those that runs trade surpluses. And they then use that trade surplus to invest in manufacturing and skills and infrastructure and so on. And that's what transforms them over time. And in a sense, there's a reason for advanced nations like America to enable that to happen to some extent, because you want to raise, if you're a citizen of the world, you want to raise global living standards. So a way to enable countries to start developing and then and then lift themselves up by their own bootstraps ultimately. That's what you would wish to achieve.
Yeah. Well, I'm fairly certain on those sorts of salaries, there's not too many people who are going to be buying the Microsoft Office suite.
Hmm.
Yeah, get them built up, get them to be a growing economy. You've got more of a market for American products, of which they
Yeah,
are
yeah,
buying none at the moment, of course.
yeah. So if I want to go to what the only, I mean, there are theories of trade, um, from neoclassical to what MMT puts forward. Uh, they are both theories which are contradicted by the empirical evidence. That's intriguing if you read on comparative advantage, which is the theory of trade that the neoclassicals
Mm.
believe in. Uh, they, when they try to empirically validate their model, they get what they call these uh, uh, anomalies and crises. The model simply does not fit the data. They argue that countries that specialise in what they're good at the moment, at the point in time, will, if they do that over time, then they'll develop more rapidly than those that maintain a diversified industrial and production base. In fact, the evidence is the exact opposite. That countries that maintain a diversified industrial structure or develop one are the ones that grow most rapidly.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite of what the theory advises, which works. And then the same thing here. If you're running a trade surplus, that it means that you are. This is a point I can't get through to the MMT mob, but when you lay the logic out, it's unavoidable. A trade surplus creates money domestically in the same way that a government deficit
Mm.
does. Now, they do admit that in their arguments, but they still basically say the government can make up for any shortfall. Well, the trouble with a country like Lesotho, if it tried to boost itself just with
Lesotho,
government
yeah,
spending,
you call it what you
all the
like.
money would go into imports.
Yeah.
Okay? So you not all the money, but a substantial proportion would go into imports.
Yeah.
So you can't get out of it that way, and therefore an export surplus is a way to generate revenue, which enables you to industrialise.
Yeah.
And what Trump is doing with these tariffs is cutting off that option for the poorest of the poor.
Yeah, so he is stopping it in its tracks, isn't it? So what you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
really is in Lesotho, they've got, I mean, pretty much, it's not a very sophisticated industrial base at the moment. They're selling garments and they're selling diamonds. They're selling it to 50% goes to South Africa, a quarter of it goes to America, and we're already seeing the level of exports to America going down over the last few months. So it is starting to
yeah,
hurt
yeah,
already. So, but if they were able to step up those exports, even with those two commodities or those two goods that they're exporting,
yep.
more money is coming into the country. That helps them to then invest in other industries and start to diversify their domestic base, which helps the economy grow still further. But Donald Trump is
Yep.
stopping that in its tracks.
Now I've got to actually check the spelling of Lesotho. It's Lesotho, isn't it?
Yeah, as I say at the beginning, it sounds like it's pronounced Lesotho, but it's pronounced Lesotho.
And apparently, by looking, I'm just trying the Atlas of Economic Complexity here, so I can make it really hard for those people listening on podcasts.
Mm.
But it doesn't. It's not even turning up. I type in
It's a very small
LE.
country. It's only about 2.5 million people. It makes New Zealand look like a behemoth. It's yeah,
It is not turning up. I was going to look in the Atlas of Economic
yeah.
Complexity
It's not
and show what
complicated
they
at
have
all.
for
I
its.
mean, it
Yeah,
is.
but I can't even get the data.
So I mean,
Yeah,
it is. I mean, the reason I've chosen that is because I mean, partially it's because they've announced this national emergency, but also it is such a small country that is such a small threat to the United States. So
yeah,
the
yeah.
cost of an average garment out of Lesotho, they do, apparently have quite nice wool. They've got they make decent jumpers. The cost, the landed cost is about $1. So there's the question:
Wow.
how much impact is it really going to have? So you got that plus shipping, which I think is probably about another dollar as well. But if the tariff is applied to the base value, then that dollar jumper suddenly becomes $1.50 jumper, which is probably sold for $60. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
actually, the inflationary impact is quite small, and maybe the impact on Lesotho, even though we are starting to see the numbers down, isn't going to be quite so overwhelming. The worry is that when Donald Trump sees that his tariffs are not having impacts, he just
He'll
goes,
bump them up.
well, either he bumps them up or he just says, well, tell you what, I'm just going to ban them. I'm just going to stop them in their tracks because pricing isn't working because they are ripping us off by selling so
Mm-hmm.
cheaply.
Yeah,
And
yeah. That's a possibility.
and
Yeah.
and then then they really are stuck as a nation. I don't know how they get out of that, apart from obviously
Yeah, well, this is. I mean,
diversifying their
this
export
is
base.
one of the difficulties for. I mean, if you a third world country or developing country, obviously, will have agriculture, but it's mainly directed towards potentially domestic consumption. If you start directing agriculture towards exports, then you really can get into the trap that MMT talks about, which is where you're exporting stuff you could use domestically, and that's the classic case of that is Ireland, which was forced to continue exporting food to to Britain uh, during the Irish potato famine when people were starving. There was still Ireland was still a net exporter during the Irish potato famine,
Mm.
and of course they could use that domestically. They weren't able to by the power structure and the fact that the English dominated their business systems. So yeah, that's the trap. Okay, so if you only have stuff that you need to consume domestically to export, then you're in serious trouble. But if you can choose something like in the textiles, okay, you make more clothes than the people need to wear domestically, and you're targeting a market you wouldn't otherwise sell into as well, then you can use your major advantage, which is your cheap labour,
Mm.
to start accumulating foreign currency, which you convert into domestic currency. And we know which this is the thing I can't get through to MMT crowd that's what actually happens. The dollars don't disappear, but they end up being reserves backing a different country's currency than yours, than the America. But they get that American money. They can then invest, and then there's a chance to develop over time and build integrated industrial structure, which otherwise they wouldn't have.
Yeah. Well, the currency is important. Obviously, they do have their own currency, but it's tied to the rand, not to the dollar.
Mm.
Fortunately for them. By the way, I got the price wrong on those jumpers. So the average price of a jumper from Lesotho, $4. And so yeah, so if you add 50%, would add $2 to it, $2 or $2.50, depending on whether you include shipping. But still, on a jumper that might cost
But
$40.
that's the buying cost.
Yeah,
You're looking at the retail
yeah,
price.
which would be $40
And as you
or
say,
more.
like
Yeah.
this is one reason that the inflation does not have to be anything like the actual tariff
Mm.
increase, because you're putting the tariff on the manufacturing and shipping costs,
Yeah.
but a huge proportion of the price you're paying is wholesale and retail markups.
Yeah.
And then the possibility exists for the wholesalers and the retailers to absorb some of that increase so they don't pass as much on to the consumer.
Yeah.
So, and then the thing also is, I mean, one advantage of Trump doing this blunderbuss style and doing it to every country on the planet is that every one of them is going to face the same situation. So there's no way for manufacturers to decide, oh, we'll move out of Lesotho and move to Addis Ababa, wherever else you might choose
Mm.
to make the stuff, because they're going to cop the same bloody thing.
Yeah.
So the easiest thing to do is to continue importing from your current source and cut your margin a bit, but also maybe pass on a bit of the cost to the consumer if you think there's if there's market power to do that.
Yeah.
And that's most likely what's going to happen.
And how much of it also gets whittled away by changes in the value of the US dollar as well.
Well, that's going down like a brick at the
Mm.
moment. Apparently, it's fallen about 10% since Trump came to power. So that's effectively doing his tariff job for him, in a way, because it's now making domestic manufacturing more competitive. The only problem is nobody in their right mind would manufacture cheap clothing in America because the cost of labour and the other costs is just too high to compete
Well, it's
with
more than
little places like
yeah,
Lesotho.
yeah, exactly, because it's more than $110 per month as the minimum wage. Yeah, long way off.
And that's what globalization has basically exploited. I mean, the same thing for China when it began. If that's no longer the case, China's wages, if you do purchases pricing parity (PPP), you get a result that Chinese wages aren't American levels, but they're a damn sight closer to them than they were
Yeah.
50 years ago. Whereas Lesotho is still a mile and a half below American wage levels.
Yeah, or many more than a mile and a half, I think. But I mean, China's a great case study in all this, isn't it? Because it started as a cheap place for labour. Then the cost of labour went up. They became innovative, and all of a sudden now they are probably more. Well, they are more innovative. If we see what they've done with AI, being able to produce an AI model which uses less processing power and did it far quicker than the United States. So they are, and what they're doing with drones, etc. building new aircraft, etc. They are, they're cutting costs, making things that are even more reliable than Boeing, for example.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
Well, that's remarkable.
yeah, I
You
know.
know,
I mean, that's
Boeing
true
bounces
innovation.
really
Yeah,
well.
planes that stay in the air, that sort of thing.
Oh, that's true. That's,
The
well, that's a
doors that
radical
don't fall
thought. I mean,
off.
who'd ever want to have one of
They've
those?
got to focus now on quality, which perhaps they don't have in America. So there's an example of a country that has followed a path. Um,
Yeah, and this is the path that Danny Roddick finds applies. And that's why, I mean, I'm sick of stupid theories in economics in general, but especially in the area of trade, because neoclassical's comparative advantage, which comes out of Ricardo's arguments back in the 1820s, is like a one horse pony. Everything in economic theory follows from the same idea: optimize what you've got at the moment and you'll be better off. And that all came from Ricardo. It's always been nonsense. Even Ricardo's own arguments, I'd love to have been there watching him when he wrote it, the comparative advantage, because he actually made, obviously at a point he could have used a particular word, industry, and he didn't. He used another word, province. And I'll talk about that con job when we come back, obviously. It's all been full of bullshit arguments. And if you just look at the data, and that's what Danny Roddick has done very well, any country that has successfully escaped underdevelopment has done it by export-oriented industrialisation in the first instance, and then when it's got a viable domestic manufacturing and services system, it's able to take on the real world, and then it tends to head slightly back towards a balance of trade over time. But that's the recipe. And what Trump is doing with these tariffs is effectively trying to cut that avenue off.
if it works, because as we've been saying, actually, a 50% tariff when the price level is so low probably won't have too much impact whatsoever. Anyway, even if we made it 200%, I suspect Lesotho is still going to be selling garments to America. But there are people who say, apologists for Trump, who'd say, well, the Lesotho deserves this. Countries like this have become too dependent on America. This is an opportunity to find their own way, which they probably will, of course. They'll just rely more on Europe, for example.
Well, and China. I mean, this is classic change of empire stuff, because America's flailing. Electing a delusional idiot. Well, they're all delusional idiots, but one like Trump is really taking it to another level, and that's the reason is because the manufacturing workers who used to vote Democrat were all screwed when the Democrats decided to side with Wall Street instead. And then Trump has just latched into that anger and taken hold of it. And I'm sure these conversations about tariffs are ones that used to happen amongst working class people in America who'd lost their jobs because of globalization. Now they're seeing that it doesn't. This is not the way to reverse a mistake. You don't reverse a mistake by making another one.
Yeah, well, unless you're Donald Trump, of course.
Yeah.
Why is Lesotho? Why has it become so dependent on America? Well, there's a bit of history behind that as well, which we'll talk about when we come back on the Debunking Economics podcast. So, why is Lesotho sending so much to America? It's about a quarter of its exports. Obviously, half goes to South Africa. It is in Africa, so obviously there's, the proximity argument. They're going to export more locally. But why does a quarter of all their exports go to America? Well, they're cheap, obviously, to produce, and America's got lots of money. But there's another thing as well. In 2000, the US passed the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, that guaranteed free access to certain goods, textiles being amongst them, from Africa for American consumers. And those countries didn't need to offer the same thing to America in return. In other words, it was an initiative passed in 2000 by the US Congress to try and help to give a leg up to these nations, to help them with development. So the eligibility criteria, they've got to obviously, follow the right of law, human rights. They've got to have market-based reforms, the usual
Yeah, usual
caveats.
package. Yeah.
Some African nations didn't match up to those requirements, but this one did. The problem is, obviously, it's been completely overwritten by what Donald Trump is now doing, and the whole act is up for renewal, as luck would have it, in September this year. And obviously, there's absolutely no chance in the world that act is going to get renewed. But that is why the dependence on America, because America provided this act to basically drive them in that direction. And now
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
saying, well, F you, we're not going to do that anymore, even though the agreement was in place for 5 years.
Well, this is the same thing with China, though. Again,
Mm.
I mean, and again, you hate me telling this story, but I'll do it anyway. In my trip to China in 81, 82, that
Oh, I've never heard this story,
similar.
Steve. Tell
I
me.
know you haven't,
Yeah.
and neither does anybody listening to the podcast. But some similar act was passed to give China a leg up. This may well have been. I'm imagining it may have been an aftermath to Nixon opening up China in the mid '70s, so that when the country finally broke away from Mao in the late '70s, pardon my lower back pain,
Mm.
old age. When they broke away from Mao and they started going industrialising, I imagine that act was passed for the same reason they've done it for Lesotho, give them a leg up. The thing is, what's Lesotho's population? A few million?
Just a few million, yeah. Less than just
Yeah,
two
and
and a quarter or something, even. Yeah.
yeah, and so nothing. But China, at the time, 1 billion people,
Mm.
but equally run by engineers. Okay, and this is the huge. I think that's forget about democracy versus dictatorship. What matters is whether you have economists versus engineers. Hey, there you go. It's not D versus D. It's E versus E. Economists in charge, you're screwed. Engineers in charge, you take over the world.
Right.
And that's fundamentally what they've done. So this is a law which has come back to bite America before. Their complaints aren't about Lesotho wiping them out in exports. It's really China. That's the sort that how do you can give me a pronunciation of China?
China.
China. Okay, so I got to get it right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
We need a Trumptionary. A Trumptionary.
I don't know. I'm fairly sure he can't pronounce Lesotho, though, as well. I'm sure he'd go
Give it a
Lesotho.
try. It's worth it. See if we can get him into a speech. He actually mentions the word. That'd be fun.
Yeah, yeah.
But Lesotho. But yeah, the leg up has worked for a country the scale of China, run by engineers.
Mm.
It's not going to work. It's working to some extent for countries like Lesotho because they do have an export industry right now. Whether they'll use that to actually become a rival to America's 2.3 million people, highly unlikely. But yeah, it's just cutting off that avenue for any country other than China. And really, when you look at the ones who have successfully gone from underdeveloped to developed economies over time, it's only about 5 or 10. But they're 5 or 10 of the major manufacturers on the planet. So in one sense, what Trump is doing, if you're looking at it from America's point of view, it's actually sensible, done stupidly, but sensible.
Yeah, but there's
To say that's a bad thing to do because ultimately it'll come back and bite us.
yeah, well, and we're also part of humanity, aren't we? So there's that question as well, rather than
Oh
just
no, hang on.
I know
There's
it's not all just
real
economics.
estate magnates are a different species. Come on.
So your back pain, by the way, we'll talk about health in a second, but your back pain, which we all experienced for a second there, it was so we felt it with you. But look, hey, here's the answer. Just hang on, because this is
Yeah.
that's what I sit on. All right.
This is going to be funny on YouTube, mate, but this is what I'm sitting on right now. I have been sitting on a normal chair.
I'm showing an
for some
exercise
time.
ball, by the way.
I've now got one of these that's a rotating thing that wobbles.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, that's
So I'm
not too
trying to-
bad. So that's good.
I used to, yeah, but either part of the old age, my knees went, so I started getting knee pain.
All right.
And then when I went to the my back has gone to back pain, so screw it.
really
the only option is to cut off the
now, do
bottom
you know
half of the
what?
body, which doesn't work anyway. So why not?
We are just it's just an old man's podcast now, isn't it? At
It's
some
an old
point
man's
we'll
podcast,
just
that's
drop
right.
all the economics and we'll just talk about ailments and how bad we're feeling.
That's
and,
true.
you know,
Your elbow and
what's
my
going
mouth.
wrong in our lives. That'll keep that'll keep us busy for a long
We
time.
can make a long podcast on that topic.
So the other side of Lesotho, though, while we're talking about health, and this is why I was sort of like saying it's not just economics, it's humanity as well. So Lesotho hasn't just been hit by tariffs, it's also been hit. It used to receive about 75 million in US aid, which of course is now 90% of that now has gone. A lot of that was to support HIV testing and programs for
I
TB,
thought
which
that might
was
be the
rife
case, yeah.
in Africa, particularly in Lesotho. Over 800 health workers were immediately dismissed on the ending of that US aid. A lot of the prevention programs for TB and for AIDS have now been closed, axed. So in effect, it's almost like a silent war against Lesotho, isn't it? Let's stop your trade and let's stop your aid. In other words,
It's probably it's a
because
whole
why should America be responsible for looking after the world? That would be the argument which Donald Trump would make. This African nation that no one's ever heard of.
yeah. I mean that's I mean doing this in any other time in history they would have got away with it. Okay,
Mm,
but what is happening now is this is basically telling every country in a situation like Lesotho, and that's pretty much all of Africa, side with China.
yeah,
Okay, China will treat you more fairly. I mean, you'll have similar, some loss of sovereignty as well in the whole process. That's probably inevitable. But yeah, this is so. Don't trust America. Don't deal with America. Join the China bloc, and like this,
mm. Well,
it's sort of like watching
it'd
the
be nice if Europe was saying, "Well, no, join the Europe bloc. Let's those rights, that enablement for you to import duty free into Europe with no expectation that we'll do the same. We just want to help you develop." Would be a smart move for Europe right now, wouldn't it? Because Europe's not going to be paying people whatever it was, that ridiculously low amount of money to create jumpers. So they're not going to lose any domestic trade. So why not help these nations, give them a leg up? Why wouldn't Europe do that?
well, Europe's decision making has
Hmm.
not been impressive for the last 3 decades or 4 decades, ever since they signed the Maastricht Treaty. So I think Europe's not going to. They might manage it at a minor level, but the country which is likely to make a strategic advance out of this and think, how can we expand our influence across the planet? It's going to be
Yeah,
China. It's
yeah,
like watching the collapse of the British Empire in fast motion, without the necessity for colonial revolts to watch America decline against China.
yeah.
It's yeah.
So then China says, "Well, okay, yep, deal with us. By the way, you've got all of these minerals. Let's help you extract
Hmm.
some of those as well.
Yep.
Let's get a few Chinese people in there. Maybe start learning Chinese in schools as your second language, and so it goes. That's how empires are started."
Yeah, yeah. When we speak English because of the English Empire, we tend to forget that.
Mm,
But this one, the amusing thing is, as you know, England is called the lingua franca. Why? Because before that happened, France was the language of international
yeah,
diplomacy, and by sheer might,
yeah,
at the industrial and military might at the time, Britain usurped that position. Americans speak something resembling English, so we've continued on with the same linguistic dominance. But yeah, but if you want to really get in touch with the heart of your true power of the 21st century, learn Mandarin.
yeah. So, and the thing is, Donald Trump's not giving them any choice, is he? He's actually forcing them down that road. He's forcing them to
Pretty
China.
much, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no if they've cut off the exports will still happen, as you say, because they can absorb, because the manufacturing cost is such a minor
So long as he
percentage of the
allows
actual
them.
retail price. Sorry.
So long as he allows it to happen. Yeah. I mean, he could, if his tariffs don't work, and he's still upset about these goods not being made in America, without realizing that will never happen because they are so cheap elsewhere. Then
Well,
he'll,
the only way to get them would be to have complete mechanisation, and that's a huge capital investment cost.
yeah.
And you've got to have the machine tool workers, which they don't have. So America, really, I mean, we're talking about Lesotho's problems here, but America's are pretty massive as well.
Yeah. All right. There's another attack on Lesotho from America. Well, from the developed world. They're suffering a prolonged drought, not helped
Mm.
by climate change, obviously. Their CO2 emissions per capita are 3% of those in America.
Mm.
So, in an ideal world, which obviously we don't live in, we'd start to penalize countries based on their CO2 emissions. And we'd say, well, okay, America's got to pay that many times more.
Mm.
Somehow there's got to be. I mean, this when we talked about the idea in the past, haven't we? That there's some sort of credit scheme based on when you buy goods, how many carbon credits is that going to take up? That would
That's something I've myself and Adam Hardy have dreamt up in terms of a national policy.
mm.
Because
If it was
one
applied
thing about
internationally, though, then
it would never would. I mean, like this is in fact this is there was a wonderful mockumentary done with a couple of sort of guerrilla movie filmmakers persuaded an American lobbying firm that they wanted their services. And the American lobbying firm then bragged about some of their successes, including the design of the IPCC and the fact that unanimous decisions are required. And also they said, we really like forcing international agreements because, nothing will ever be decided at the international level. Even if there's not a country that isn't opposed to a proposal, they can pay a country enough to become opposed to a proposal, and therefore nothing ever happens. So I can't see that scheme ever happening. Well, it won't happen at the domestic level either, but it certainly won't happen at the international.
Which is,
Because as soon as you did, British and Americans would say, oh, no way, we're not going to be screwed by the Lesothans because they consume so much less. It would fail to be passed in the first instance.
yeah, but it would, if you're looking for a theoretical solution, that would be the answer, wouldn't it? Saying, well, you're consuming so much
Yeah.
less, that means your goods would cost less of these tokens that everyone's got a limited supply of. So therefore, everyone would be buying stuff from Lesotho.
Well, this is that's one reason why Keynes designed the Bancor, which again that's not going to happen either. Though there's a possibility of something like it happening with countries moving away from the American dollar. The whole BRICS initiative, badly named, but that may lead to an alternative trading system not using the American dollar. But the idea of the Bancor's design was that any countries running sustained deficits or surpluses were charged interest, and the interest was then passed to a reserve account, which was then distributed to developing countries. And the only thing they could use that for was importing from advanced countries. So there was a form of aid tied up in the structure of the payment system.
Yeah.
And a similar thing might well be done. China probably, given its industrial might, could probably cope with that. And given its engineering, it's not going to make the same mistakes America did and drive itself into deindustrialization.
Well, just Google back, if you're new to the podcast, Google back for when we talk about the Bancor, which was Keynes's idea coming out of the Bretton Woods Agreement that didn't get any traction, sadly, because it would have solved so many problems. So the problem for Lesotho, being the marketing person I am, if I was looking at the solution to all of this, as we're sort of moving to this more homogenized world where people are looking at, flicking through their page and seeing artificial intelligence created pictures of non-entities, and the world's just becoming a bit blah. What Africa does have is culture, doesn't it? And if you make a good movie in Lesotho, so it's based in Lesotho, which grabs some of their culture so people get an interest in that culture, and then start to say, well, do you know what? Lesotho products are not cheap products. They're actually, there's premium products, and there's stuff here which are environmentally friendly products as well, So it's worth paying a premium for Lesotho goods. And the markup happens in Lesotho, not in America or in Europe. That's what they've got to try and aim towards. And that is a marketing solution to an issue. And actually, I don't believe that is insurmountable and actually could be the solution. It's just changing people's mindset, because there's loads of people in the West who've got loads of money. And all you need to do is make Lesotho cool, and people will pay for it. And you've just got to make sure that the people raking that money in are living in Lesotho. That would be a nice outcome.
Yeah, well, it's an angle, but I do. If I have had a very tiny involvement with Africa over time, but enough to appreciate the music. Holland Tunji, for those who know that particular band, or not. It's not a band. It's a musical.
Yeah. It's not just music. It's a continent, rich in culture, and we just don't embrace it.
The African clothing, I have to say, when I see African people dressed in genuine African clothing, depending on the region they're coming from, of course, in Amsterdam's like more colourful than the Europeans. Yeah. The singing, as eventually, and the fact that there is still our history was as nomads, and then eventually sedentary agriculture. In some ways, Africa's far closer to that than, far closer to Europe and America, and that's back to the roots type thing.
Yeah,
remember the show called Roots. So there's potential things you could make to market it, but I think the best thing, forget about selling it to Americans and Europeans, sell it to the Chinese.
Yeah. Yeah, and help China dominate the world. Yeah, if
Yep,
that's what we
yep,
want.
yep. I mean, give up on America. America is so last century.
Yeah, yeah. So not cool. All right, very good. Well, good luck to Lesotho. Maybe this is the making of them. But anyway, if it's achieved nothing else, we've all learned how to pronounce it. And we'll catch you again soon. Thanks, Steve.
Hey, mate, fine.